Unit 1, Chapter 3, Lecture, Americans at Work.
Whether you love it or hate it, work is a major part of most people's lives everywhere in the world. Americans are no exception. Americans might complain about Blue Monday when they have to go back to work after the weekend. But most people put a lot of importance on their job, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of identity. In fact, when Americans are introduced to a new person, they almost always ask each other, "What do you do?" And they're asking, "What's your job or profession?" Today, however, we won't look at work in terms of what work means socially or psychologically. Rather, we're going to take a look at work in the United States today from two perspectives. First, we'll take a historical look at work in America, and we'll do that by looking at how things changed for the American worker from the beginning to the end of the 20th century. That is, from the year 1900 to the year 1999. And then we'll look at how U.S. workers are doing today. As we look at the changes over the last century, we're going to use a lot of statistics to describe these changes. So you're going to need to write down a lot of numbers today in our lecture. First, let's consider how the type of work people were involved in changed. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, about 38% of the workforce was involved in agriculture. That is, they worked on a farm. And by the end of the century, only 3% still worked on farms. There was also a large decrease in the number of people working in mining, manufacturing, and construction. The number of workers in mining, manufacturing, and construction went down from 31% to 19%. Now, while the numbers of people in these goods-producing industries went down, the number of people in the service industries went up. And as you may know, a service industry is one that provides a service rather than goods or products. A few examples include transportation, tourism, banking, advertising, healthcare, and legal services. I'm sure you can think of more. The service industry workforce jumped from 31% of the workforce at the turn of the century to 78% in 1999. Now, let's recap the numbers. In 1900, 38% in agriculture, 31% in mining, manufacturing, and construction, and 31% in the service industries. Now, that should add up to 100%. Okay, 1999, 3% in agriculture, 19% in mining, manufacturing, and construction, and 78% in the service industries. And again, that should add up to 100%. Now, the labor force changed in other important ways. For example, child labor was not unusual at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1900, there were 1,750,000 children aged 10 to 15 working full-time in the labor force. This was 6% of the labor force. Now, over the years, child labor laws became much stricter, and by 1999, it was illegal for anyone under 16 to work full-time in any of the 50 states. Whereas the number of children in the workforce went down, the number of women went up dramatically. In 1900, only 19% of women were employed. In 1999, 60% of women were holding down jobs. Now, let's see what happens to wages and salaries. Now, all the numbers I'll give you are in terms of 1999 dollars. And let me explain that. In 1900, the average per capita income was $4,200 a year. Now, that doesn't mean that the average worker in 1900 earned $4,200 a year, but that what he or she earned was equal to $4,200 in 1999. That is, the amount of money the average worker earned in 1900 was worth the same as $4,200 in 1999. Okay? The average per capita income in 1999 was $33,700. Not only did people earn a lot more money at the end of the century, but they also received a lot more in benefits than at the beginning of the century. Now, one of the important benefits most workers received later in the century was health insurance. Whereas wages and salaries rose over the century, the average work week dropped. That is, workers in general didn't work as long hours in 1999 as they did in 1900. Now, the last area that I'd like to give you a few statistics about is workplace safety. Now, most of us go to work every day and we don't think a lot about whether we're safe or not. But in 1900, it was a real concern for a lot of workers. There aren't a lot of statistics available, but the U.S. government does have statistics on two industries that'll give you some idea of the differences today. In 1900, almost 1,500 workers were killed in coal mining accidents. In 1999, the number was 35. 2,555 railroad workers, were killed in 1900, compared to 56 in 1999. Now, people often tend to romanticize the past and talk about the good old days, but I think it's fair to say that by the end of the 20th century, U.S. workers in general made more money, they enjoyed more benefits, and their working conditions improved greatly. Now let's turn our attention to the current situation for U.S. workers. The picture's not so rosy as the one drawn by comparing U.S. workers at the beginning and the end of the 20th century. I'm going to focus on the current situation in terms of productivity, working hours, and wages and salaries. Now, first, let's consider the number of hours worked. According to a 2003 study released by the United Nations International Labor Organization, U.S. workers are the most productive in the world among industrialized nations, but they work longer hours than European workers to achieve this productivity. Europeans typically have 4 to 6 weeks of vacation a year, whereas the American worker has only about 2 weeks. This study points out that the longer working hours in the United States is a rising trend, while the trend in other industrialized countries is the opposite. Workers in some European countries actually outproduce American workers per hour of work. It's been suggested that this higher rate of productivity might be because European workers are less stressed than U.S. workers. At any rate, there seems to be a general agreement that U.S. productivity has greatly increased over the last 30 years. However, workers have not seen their wages rise at the same rate. A group of sociologists in their book, Inequality by Design, point out that there is a growing gap between rich Americans and everyone else in the United States. They write that between 1949 and 1974, increases in productivity were matched by increases in wages for workers in both manufacturing and service industries. But since 1974, productivity increased 68% in manufacturing and 50% in services. But real wages stagnated. That is, wages moved up little or not at all. So where does all the money generated by increased productivity go then? Well, according to the authors of this book, the money goes to the salaries for CEOs, to the stock market, and to corporate profits. Workers play a great role in increasing productivity, but no longer see their wages connected to increased productivity. In other words, CEOs' salaries, the stock market, and corporate profits go up as work productivity goes up, but workers' wages don't. Now, what are the reasons why U.S. workers, who are the most productive in the world, have to work longer hours, have fewer vacation days, and see their wages stagnate and not rising at the same rate as productivity? Well, the answer to this question is complex and controversial. But there are two reasons most people who speak or write about the issues mention. The first is that labor unions in the United States have lost great power since the beginning of the 1980s. And the second is that the government has passed laws that favor the rich and weaken the rights of workers. Well, I see our time is up, so I'll see you next time.